do all of your research up front. Like, I mean, you can't do all your research up front. You're always learning new things every single day, but like do your homework, no ideas had in a vacuum. If you have an idea, make sure you look at the lay of the land, look at all the competition that exists out there, see, make a spreadsheet even, or just, we'll get out your whiteboard and look at how all the ways in which your business is different from their businesses, and then use that difference at the end to really shine, or design a marketing strategy around, or design, help evolve or iterate your product to maybe add more differentiators or double down on those differences.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the CEO and founder of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. Now, today we have another great guest on the podcast, Ian Abbott. And Ian has kind of gone in, or throughout his career or life, has kind of gone back and forth between business and academics. And originally starting out in high school, got into high school, had some friends that wanted to start a business with. It was kind of Quora, but before Quora was a thing, and grew to, I think, 50,000 users, merged with another retailer, finished high school after getting kicked out of high school, I think, a few times, and he'll tell us a little bit about that. And then went to Dartmouth, studied physics as well as math, did a startup with some friends for a payment platform with marijuana, which was an interesting one, until the DOJ told him it probably wasn't a good idea. Went back to school, worked on some various startups, including, I think, kettlebell business, coffee business, and other ones, as well as puttering through a few different jobs before kind of diving into what he's doing now today with ARC, and he'll provide a bit more detail on that as well. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Ian.
Hey, how are you, man?
Oh, I'm doing great and excited to have you on. So I just gave kind of the quick run through to a much longer journey. So take us a little bit back in time, back to high school, and kind of how things all started for you.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, back in high school, I wasn't that into academics. I always wanted to, start a business. So I did various, things, and in early high school, tried various things. Some business out in Colorado. Mainly very, very small scale stuff. Tried to work with my dad, who, is working on like a tap system, tried to develop some like a shoot off of that. And then kind of found my way to like a more the tech side of things. I took more of an interest in computers. I ended up developing like a small software company that was called Abbott. I was very young at the time, started when I was like 15. Like you said, we ended up growing it to like a very small user base. And then it was a more fashion, I guess the discussions that ended up happening on the platform more kind of fashion forward, just for whatever reason. It wasn't intended, just kind of happened that way. So there was a retailer in Texas, this guy launching something called the Edition Group or Edition Collective, that had retail stores, and had some sales online, and wanted to build out like a blog component. So essentially he liked our community and wanted to kind of build off it, and we merged with him. And then he ended up selling the company down the road a few years to a retailer called Q Retailers, and that was that story. And that was fun. I know that wasn't like the retirement plan really, so I still did go to college. So I went to college for like a little bit.
Dive in, or just before that. So, I mean, because I would say that's a pretty good accomplishment. Anything that has a user base, 50,000 users, isn't nothing or anything to sneeze at. I think it's cool that you guys are able to build that, especially in high school. So just diving into that a bit, how did you guys come up with the idea? How did you grow the user base? And then what made you decide to merge?
Okay. Yeah. So first, so we sort of like to backtrack a little bit. We came up with an idea for more of like, general, like less general, more specific utility-based social networks. So that's what we were kind of like focused on looking at. And then we didn't really, it was kind of right pre-Quora or right around Quora. We didn't really heard of it yet, or it was like right around the same time. And so we kind of was that same idea. So it was like, the idea was Habity, and it was for like a Q&A kind of social network, with maybe like a little bit more heavy on the social component than they were on the topic component. We were more like a 50-50 weight. And that was kind of, that's mainly the only differentiator. And then, so then we kind of, from an interest in social networks to more like utility-based social networks, the idea kind of emerged from that. It was mainly me in the beginning. And then I actually ended up working with some I got a space in like a WeWork Labs downtown. I actually like got the office next to that guy who did Fire Festival, Billy McFarland. He had some company, I don't know if you've heard of that whole thing, which is hilarious, where they threw this concert, and it ended up in tents and stuff. It's a whole different story. But anyway, so I had a space and WeWork there, and I ended up meeting like a lot of different people there who were a lot older, who ended up helping with the business. Including like later on our kind of co-CEO, we had this guy named Brendan Mangus, who's a great guy. And yeah, I mean, the business kind of, and then it grew to a couple more people. We had a CTO who was remote, named Alex. And then my friends also like Niall came and helped out, work there for a bit. But yeah, that was mainly kind of a solo journey at the beginning, in my first kind of foray into entrepreneurship. Basically as we ended up getting traction, the team scaled to like a solid like 4 people, 5 people. And then I was actually down in a meeting for Texas to do fundraising for it, to try to take it to kind of the next level. And then in that meeting, I ended up meeting with this guy or an investor who wanted me to introduce to a friend who was an entrepreneur who was going to give advice. And that was the fashion guy. And he ended up taking an interest in the business, as maybe merging them for his platform. And at that time, the business kind of we had strong growth at the beginning. It was kind of tapering off. We realized Cora was growing really, really fast. There's a bunch of other factors like, pressure to go to college and things like that. So it was essentially when Matt made his offer, it's like, okay, that just sounded good to me, essentially at the time.
Yeah. Hey, any business you can start in high school and get any sort of an offer or merger or anything of that. And I would certainly can't put that in the win column. So that's pretty cool. So now you get done with high school, you do that kind of as a fun business that you do with some of your friends, build it up, get the user base, sell it off. When you go to college and, you studied, physics and I think it was math and physics. And then coming out of college, how did that what did you do after college? Or was a payments platform for marijuana during college or after college? I can't remember which way you mentioned.
Yeah, that was during college. So yeah, I was there for college for essentially my freshman year and the first bit of my sophomore year. And then I left to go, with my friend Victor Stewart, we left to go start that platform, which we were calling Spark and Lightning. And so yeah, I did that after maybe my first sophomore term there.
So now walk us through, because I think that was, you're saying, it'd be, you found out about a payment issue or, how to marijuana industry, especially where it wasn't legal in the time and still isn't, and at least on the federal level.
Not federally legal. Yeah.
Federally it was just legal. So it was a difficulty on the payments platform to be able to manage money. So how did you guys get into that? And then how did you get the DOJ involved where they said, maybe not a good idea?
Yeah, that was much later. Yeah. So at the beginning, we just used marijuana recreationally, and we were a fan of its a creative powers, and essentially just thought the space was proliferating. It was when Colorado just became legal. My family lives out in Colorado, so we thought maybe we could go out there and stay with them for a bit and try to launch the business. Essentially the idea is we were looking to get into marijuana, but we were looking not to get into it in terms of seed to sale or any kind of development of the product. Really, we had no expertise in that. We weren't botanists or anything like that. So we didn't really know anything about that kind of the business, nor did we want to store a storefront. They were very hard to get the licenses at the time. A lot of politics involved. We thought that would be risky as well. But, we were just looking for opportunities in the space and studying the space for a while, and getting, building something that's kind of at the infrastructure level made sense to us. It was safe. It was something like a safe bet. So it was something that could have good long-term viability. And one of the major problems in that space, was this whole banking problem. And then we also, our software was a little bit of our backgrounds as well as physics and math. It's more a quantitative side, systems side of things. So that's where we were kind of thinking is what kind of systems could we maybe build for support for infrastructure for the industry. And then, so that was just kind of the mindset. And then we, essentially found this banking issue. And essentially came down to the money can't leave the states. It can't touch FedWire, anything supported by it, or SWIFT, right? A regular, go over, therefore normal ACH things. And the underwriting banks, the transactions couldn't be like large banks. They would have to be kind of inside the state and housed, it wouldn't have to leave, the network, the transactions couldn't leave the state essentially. So, So essentially, yeah, we were trying to find a solution, that maybe we could figure out, and what we kind of came up with was like, okay, why don't we do some kind of wallet to wallet transfer, and kind of have like an e-wallet that would then have like a feature where where it would be loaded when you swiped, essentially, so you wouldn't have to preload it or anything. And then there would be a wallet to wallet transfer, be a closed system between the phone, the mobile application, and the POS. So then we would sell kind of the system like an app to the consumer, or the e-wallet to the consumer, that then you'd use to buy marijuana with your phone from. And then we sold like a POS to the dispensaries, essentially, that would then, they would receive the payment and be able to clear out or check out the customer. And then it went over like a private cellular network, essentially, was the solution. We had a legal opinion written up on it to review everything. Everything like looked good. We found some guy who thought, well, not excuse, like found a guy to say it's legal, but it was like, we got someone to sign off on it, say it was legal. So we were confident. And then we were going to go launch the platform. We were raising money. There was a firm who was raising money that actually successfully raised money now, but at the time hadn't, in New York, called Tuatara. We were going to do a deal with them. And then essentially, what happened was we wanted one extra step of verification. We didn't really want to go to jail. So we
go figure,
decided,
it may not be worth going as a startup to go to jail. So that's probably a good thing.
Move first and ask questions later. We thought when you're this close to the line legally, it was best to not, maybe take the safer route. So it's like we wrote to the DOJ asking their opinion on our solution. And they were essentially like, absolutely not. If you pursue this, like, we're gonna, like, no, just don't. So then we had to kind of take that piece of information and decide, like, did we want to move forward with the concept? And at the end of the day, we didn't. But what was very interesting about that whole journey was that, the underwriting bank that we brought the deal to do the underwriting for the e-wallet was actually, it ended up not being a cooperative, but kind of an international bank that had a kind of some sort of presence electronically in Colorado, or physically. It's called Wirecard. And yeah, it was this German company. And now what's hilarious is the CEO ended up having all these problems internationally for processing marijuana transactions. And now he's like some sort of fugitive. But it's hilarious because I'm not certain if we were the ones who told them about the industry, because when we called them, when we were working with them, we're trying to do our infrastructure with them, they had no idea, or asking many questions about the industry. So it's very funny if the two are connected, or he decided to move forward with the concept or his version of it when we didn't. But it was like, kind of, I think we ultimately dodged a bullet with that one, because it sounds like we could have gotten into some trouble.
You may have gone down the same road that got the other guy in trouble. So it was a blessing that you were that you got stopped by the DOJ before you went too far down. So now you do that, and so so you do that, and that is kind of another interesting part of your journey as you're continuing along. Then after you do that for a period of time, I think you finished up the degree, or then you went, or did you go back to school? Or was it?
No, I never went back to school.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I never went back to school. I just been doing odds and ends, like, took more of an interest in like academic work. Did some like much smaller scale startups, like a coffee company that was like a nootropics company, where it was like called 2 to 1. It was 200 milligrams of theanine, 100 milligrams of caffeine, cold brew in like a bioplastic bag that was direct to consumer. And then my friend started that company, Kettlebell Kitchen. And then it, a little bit later on, it went it went into bankruptcy eventually. The debt called on it. There was a variety of reasons, bad timing, couldn't raise the money, but it was really strong business, really strong, really good LTV, CAC, like good metrics, also strong consumer sentiment, a good brand, like big red box. So essentially we went to bankruptcy court and we submitted a bid to buy it at all the intellectual property and the trademarks and the customer lists and social media accounts, get that all from bankruptcy. And I guess, we ended up winning the bid for like 10 grand. I mean, it was formerly $100 million company. We were going to, the plan is we're relaunching. This happened maybe like a year ago. So now we're relaunching the business, or he's relaunched the business. He's running that business as with a distributed manufacturing plan as the back end instead. So a lot of, think like Territory Foods back end, now Kettlebell Kitchen with a brand front end. So anyway, so I'm kind of jumping a little bit, but that was most recent thing in terms of business, that I've done. And then the coffee company as well. Before that, in the interim, since like the fall of, I guess, Spark and Lightning, I just, mainly doing a lot of academic work, working on some papers with, some friends of mine or physicists and, at NYU and Courant and, you know, at SUNY. Sorry, I forgot the name of that. And my friend who's like a topologist, and essentially just been, studying, thinking, working on new ideas. And, that's kind of during this, kind of quiet period is when I thought of the business, I'm working on now, and that you're helping me with the intellectual property. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and as full disclosure for listeners, I met Ian. We're working on the idea for intellectual property to protect it, and so with that, make sure not to steal his ideas. We talk about it a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But one of the things that I thought was interesting, so maybe just clue in the audience a bit. So bringing that up to kind of where you're at today, and as we chatted through your journey, now you're at ARC, right? Which ARC is kind of a bit of I would say a futurist type of an idea where you're now going to be able to move housing, or easily move housing between locations via almost kind of a storage container or compact type of a housing arrangement. But how did you kind of get into that idea? How is it going? Kind of where's it at? And kind of give it a bit of an introduction to the audience with all of where you're at today.
Yeah, sure, man. So ARC is essentially like what I'm looking to do is build kind of a device or a machine as an urban plan. So, most devices are like the size of the iPhone or like the computer. This would be the same exact thing, just really, really big. Just some kind of systems and something that's more, right now, all the urban plans you can think of kind of like flat, kind of 3D static canvases, and then you make things on top of, and all the different components are completely disconnected from one another, like the roads, the transit components, the utilities, and also the structures, the permanent structures there. ARC is kind of, as we'll get more into, would be more of a like a fungible concept where a large percentage of the urban plan would be movable, and then you'd have a smaller percent, which would be like a skeleton that's permanent. But basically, I've always been really into architecture. I've always been really into engineering. I'm not an engineer, not an architect. I've just always really loved these things. And, I've always, even though I've loved software and love, kind of formal systems and love abstract things in theory, I've always wanted to do something like really cool, like, and build like a physical product in the physical world, or like a physical system, and that's essentially where I am today. So during this period, of contemplation, I sort of thought a lot about how my different interests or my strengths could really come together. A lot of the, through my life experiences, a lot of the information I've gathered, how could it be combined in a way, that maybe is a new concept, a new solution in the marketplace that doesn't exist. What could be something, again, like my mind, goes towards systems, goes towards infrastructure. I want to go as like low level as possible, and like the human stack of things, so I was just thinking of, what, in a physical world, and I was kind of scale agnostic, so like, it could be the size of a pencil, or could be, the size of an urban plan or something, so then, so from there, what developed is, I really found transit oriented development, and I found like the mobile architecture movement. And I really liked both of those movements. And I didn't quite understand why, like, with all the containerization that's happening, which is also another move in architecture, like, people building things like container homes, or people even building container farms, production facilities that are containerized, everything mapped to the container, and so I didn't quite understand why, that perspective wasn't combined a little bit with mobile architecture and maybe some kind of transportation component. Because if like the function of containerization in the first place is, it improved port logistics and, reduced cost for shipping, and really enabled, globalization in a big way. So like, the current movement in architecture with containerization you're containerizing just for a design reason. You're not containerizing for a transportation reason, which is the point of containerization. So basically it's like, I thought that was like a whole,
So if I were to almost maybe summarize that or encapsulate the idea is basically you'd almost take what would be a similar size to what would be a storage container, what you see on a train or be a cargo ship. You then use that as a done up. You'd make that into a home, a nice living facility, and then you'd basically be able to move those around the country, or via storage, or a different location mechanisms and transportation, you'd be able to move. So if you were retired and you wanted to go from a cold place to you were a snowbird and you wanted to go to a warm place, you could just simply have your home. It would you'd put or submit it, they would move your house from Utah and Salt Lake City, which is cold, to Arizona, which is warm, and you could move back and forth. Or if you're a college student and you wanted to go to a different university, you just have them simply transport your home. You could stay in it. They would transport you from one location to another, and you wouldn't have to pick up all your stuff and move. Is that about right?
Exactly correct. Yeah. So that's like kind of the idea of ARC would be sort of the large scale like distributed system or device that is a platform to facilitate this movement. So you can even think about it as like a network of high bay storage systems, and then what you storage retrieval systems and transfer system, I guess, between. So it's like what it is really is, these vertical frames, because we're kind of fighting urban sprawl more with the design. We don't want to have all the containers spread out everywhere like an RV park. We want to have it more contained, have a smaller footprint, and a bunch of other efficiencies as well. And then, so what it is basically the idea of ARC is these frames that then with a gantry elevator in the center that then the containerized units then slide onto or slide under via like a track mover. And then essentially the gantry elevator comes down internal to the frame and picks it up and then plugs your containerized residence into a dock, which contains a solarium for a little bit more width, and then a balcony, essentially. And so then, and then the container would then come back down, be plugged into a well car with a track mover below it. And then that would come and cycle through the site if it wanted to go to a different frame within the same site or location, or would go down to a siding built along a railway where another gantry would lift it and move it on to a well car, different kind of well car that would then be used to transfer it to another site via like our partner rail service. So essentially, to circle back and explain the idea a little bit, the essential point of ARC would be to build these frames along America's rail system, which is huge. We have 140,000 miles of it. There's a lot of, a track that's being abandoned every year as the big companies kind of consolidate their operations to mainly just class 1 style stuff where they're moving really large volumes of freight. So there's a lot of opportunity to take over abandoned track or build track extensions to work with these, they're the largest landholders in the United States, these, 5 companies, BNSF, Union Pacific and such. So, they have internal real estate development teams and economic development teams where people are usually building, sidings for, let's say, like a mining operation to connect to a mine or some kind of refinement facility or grain or storage or transfer or things like this. So we would be looking to buy land or work with these companies in kind of more remote and beautiful areas where maybe there's less rail traffic, where we could be at first like a manifest customer, would do manifest service.
Diving in just a little bit, just because without getting too much in the weeds, and definitely we'll give you an opportunity to share if people are interested, if they want to reach out, they want to find out more, absolutely encourage everybody to do so. But I think that kind of, as we wrap towards the end of the podcast, and there's always more things we want to talk about than time to talk about them, that gives everybody a bit of an introduction. I definitely encourage everybody to reach out and find out more. So kind of with that, as we do have to wrap up, and we also, just as a reminder, everybody, we have a bonus question. We'll talk just a little bit about intellectual property after the normal episode. But before that, we'll jump to the last 2 questions I always ask at the end of each podcast. So the first question I always ask is, so, we just chatted all the way through your journey, including kind of what you guys are up or where you're at today and kind of where things are headed. But along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? And what did you learn from it?
So the worst business decision I ever made was probably, let me think about that. Was probably I gotta give this a minute. Sorry.
Or one of the decisions, if you could go back, that you would change or do it differently.
I think, maybe not focusing on our social network company when we were 15 as much as I should have, and maybe turning more towards like trying to get into an Ivy League school, or you're following a more traditional route. I mean, definitely happy, since Cora was competent. Maybe I think I kind of bowed out too early and could have tried to run that business a little harder and pressed it to be a little bigger, iterated faster, and, maybe pivoted and done something with it. That definitely, sticks with me. The other one is maybe not asking the DOJ for permission. Maybe if we worked with a cooperative or tried to get something out, or just move forward with a slightly modified solution, giving that a little extra thought, maybe we could have done something there. Essentially that's those 2.
And or you may have been in jail had you not asked the DOJ. So it would
Right,
have been
right.
one of those that we don't know what would have happened. It would be interesting if we could have gone back and played it out, how it would have ended up taking place. So definitely, but I think that that's an issue where every startup, every inventor, every entrepreneur kind of hits that. Hey, is this a good idea? Should I keep pushing on it? Is it one where I should let it go or pivot or go in a different direction? And it's always one where it's much easier, hindsight 2020, to say, oh, I wish I would have gone a different direction. But at the time, you'd make the best decision you can with the information you have on hand. So I definitely think that's something to learn from. So second question I'll ask, which is, now if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Do all of your research up front. Like, you can't do all your research up front. You're always learning new things every single day, but like do your homework, no ideas had in a vacuum. If you have an idea, make sure you look at the lay of the land, look at all the competition that exists out there, see, make a spreadsheet even, or just, we'll get out your whiteboard and look at how all the ways in which your business is different from their businesses, and then use that difference at the end to really shine, or design a marketing strategy around, or design, help evolve or iterate your product to maybe add more differentiators or double down on those differences.
No, and I like that, because I think, sometimes, especially as an entrepreneur, you tend to want to dive in, you want to get going. It's it's almost that new shiny object. You're excited about it. There, you can see a lot of opportunity. And yet sometimes, because you get so excited about it, you talk yourself into the idea. You never actually do that kind of that due diligence. You never check and see, have you done your homework? Have you figured out, is it a viable option? Is it something people are willing to pay for? Are there competitors? What can you charge for this? What is it going to take to start it up and doing it? And, and how are you going to make it? How are you going to follow through with it? All of those things are things that you should be considering as you get going. And doesn't mean you can get or keep the idea going, but do that homework as you're getting going, so that you can know what that roadmap is, what that strategy is, and before you dive in and get too far into it. So I think that's a great piece of advice. Well, before we dive into the bonus question, if people are just listening to the normal episode and aren't interested in intellectual property, which I totally understand, but if they want to reach out to you, they want to find out more about, your business, about what you guys are doing with ARC, they want to be a customer, a client, a investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out and find out more?
You just email my personal email, iha94@icloud.com, and I'll answer any and all questions.
All right. Well, I definitely encourage everybody to reach out and find out more and get connected. Well, as we wrap up with the normal part of the episode, thank you again for coming on. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, just go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. We'd love to hear your journey. Two more things as a listener. One, make sure to click subscribe in your podcast player so you know when all of our awesome episodes come out. And two, leave us a review so everybody else can find out about all of our awesome episodes. Last but not least, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else, feel free to reach out to us. Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. So now, as we've wrapped up with the normal portion of the episode, we always have the bonus. We have the bonus portion where we get to talk about one of my favorite projects or topics, which is intellectual property. So with that, I'll switch gears and we'll turn it over to you to ask your number one intellectual property question.
Yeah. How often do you guys run into issues with the greater international patent, kind of market than, for companies that want to be like not just the United States, but for all over? I know that's a different search process. It's more expensive, obviously. It's more in depth, a lot more data to sift through. How often or what percent of time do you end up, you file something in the US and then a company wants to go international? Do those companies end up running into trouble? Or is that, less frequent than, than you'd expect, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the old attorney's answer of, every time you ask an attorney for an answer, they always say it depends, but it is one that it depends. But I'll give you a little bit of an insight. Every company is a bit different in the sense that some companies, depending on their industry, depending on what they're doing and everything else, they are, their market is really going to be in one given country, or so give you an example. Have a client that's in the medical device industry, and they look at it and say, okay, by far, hands down, the most money that's been spent in the medical industry is done in the U.S. That's where where the most of the money is, where all the research and development is, where a lot of money is spent on healthcare industry in general. And so they're saying, okay, our target market is going to be in the U.S. That's where most of our clients are. That's where we can make the biggest splash and the best return. And so they focus their intellectual property portfolio on the U.S. On the other hand, we have another client, and that's in a different industry, and theirs is much more of a split. They say, hey, about 50% of our market's going to be in the US, 50% is going to be in Europe. We need to have coverage on both. And so then they end up going down that path because that's where they're going to be. So really, when you're looking at, how to tackle international markets and whether or not it's important, whether or not you have issues, I would look at it and see, where is your marketplace going to be? Where are you going to make an entrance? Where are you going to try and sell? And then based on that, you choose where your biggest part or portions of the market is, where the highest likelihood is of your clientele to be, and that's where you focus on your intellectual property. So for some people, is one country, is one location. For some, it splits into multiple, and it's really more of a matter of what is a business, where your clients are, and where do you want to have the greatest amount of protection.
Cool. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up the podcast. And great question. And if you or anybody in the audience ever has any other questions, always feel free to go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. Always happy to answer any questions you might have. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure, Ian, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. It was fun chatting.